Okay, let's see. Come on, Twitch. Alright, there we are. Exciting! Alright, I'll tell the world that we're streaming, because the world wants to know. Streaming some plastic toy mech prototyping. And, Pachow Chang. I just had a bunch of candy, because I'm not very bright. So, we shall see whether I end up with a really sticky mouth and have a hard time talking. If so, it'll be a huge change from normal, I'm sure. Alright, so I came up with I've been brainstorming for some game ideas that I actually want to do. And to keep coming back around to the idea of a mech programming game, I'm not 100% sure about the programming part in terms of how to arrange that in Unreal. Unreal is not very friendly to 2D stuff, or at least I haven't figured out how to make it work very well. There's a lot of other things we could do. We could do 3D programming, stuff like that. It'd be kind of interesting. But, of course, the easiest thing to do is to make some mecha. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to try and do some plastic toy mech designs. Now, the idea here is that these are customizable to the extent that you can slap on heavier or less heavy armor and give them a different main weapon and sub-weapon, standard mech design stuff. So on the other page, I've got a bunch of mech toys open just to take a look. And when we're talking about plastic mecha, the big challenge with a plastic mecha toy, so if we were going to just like sketch in mecha arms and stuff like that, the big challenge with the plastic mecha is, of course, the legs, because they have to be able to allow the mech to stand up, right, and move around. So even though it's a toy, we're not going to be like, ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. We're going to have to actually make it walk. And to do that, you need to have some pretty advanced toys. Most toys are basically just action figure toys, and, they don't walk. You can pose them, but they don't walk. So if we want to look at mecha toys that can walk, we're going to look at hip structures where we have a very specific kind of jointing. And I think we need to nail that down before we nail down any other part of the mech. And we don't have to come up with a specific visual for it. We just have to understand the kind of visual we're looking for. And by most accounts, the most common way to do the jointing is with ball joints here at the hips, which will allow you to move the legs in any of the various directions, right? And then at the knees, they often use some kind of hinge joint. You could use a ball joint, but in this case, the knees aren't supposed to bend in those ways, so a hinge joint makes a lot of sense. But the problem with the hinge joint there is, of course, the feet, because the feet are fundamentally going to have to go flat on the surface, and if the leg is lifting and moving and all that jazz, then the foot is going to be changing direction as well. So that's why the foot joint is often also a ball joint. And you can see this kind of configuration on the more expensive mech toys that you can find on the market. And we're talking about plastic mech toys, not like actual robot mech toys. And so this setup is a fairly reliable way to set up the legs. So the thing here to note is that the ball joints are the part of this that need to really be handled with care, because they're an opportunity, right? If we can make the ball joints feel properly toy-ish, then we can really kind of sell this idea, because a real sci-fi mech made by hardcore sci-fi fans won't have any ball joints, because ball joints don't fundamentally hold very well. They're not very good at flexing. They don't have very much strength behind them. But if we're making a toy, then the fact that we have ball joints is a big difference between us and more of a sci-fi mech environment. So if we can play those ball joints up, then we can sort of sell the fact that these are toys rather than just badly done sci-fi mechs. Obviously, we're going to have plastic stuff as well. So I think that in order to like all the it's going to be visuals are going to be plastic with like paper stickers, that sort of thing. So that's going to be our visual, and the ball joints can really help us to sell the fact that this is a toy, not a giant robot that someone made very poorly. The thing about the ball joints is that because it's a toy, we can expose these ball joints. They don't have to be heavily armored like they would have to be on a real mech. And because of that, our armor is basically like, I don't know how you want to put it, like fetish armor. It doesn't actually have to protect the mech because the mech is a toy. So by having these exposed ball joints with their, rail thin extenders and stuff like that, we can probably get these mechs to really feel like toys. And I thought we should probably try and come up with some designs, some ideas on how it's going to look. So that's what we're going to do. There are a couple of toys on the other screen that I rather like. One is there's this rather egg-shaped toy, and this is, I think it comes from probably Star Wars, the newer, not the newest, the prequels, the Star Wars prequels. They had those robots that would like fold out, and so I think what this is it's kind of based on that idea. So you'd have like, for example, a dome head like this, and then you'd have a body, and the idea here is that the head has folded up away from the front, and then you'd have your side guns like this with your guns showing out here, and those are arms that get folded into the spherical planes. And this is not, I'm basically just sketching up what I'm seeing. I'm not designing at this point, so I'm not going to say this is a clone because I'm just doing a quick little sketch to block out what it's showing. It's not how we're going to be building our mechs. But one of the things I really like about this kind of toy is that it has an interior and an exterior. And for my preferences, that's always been the kind of visual I prefer. I like to have it so that there is some kind of like smooth outer hull shell, armor basically. And then on the inside, you've got this dark area full of machinery. And I think that's what I want to focus on for this. I want to have these plastic parts, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to have the interior plastic be something. Jojo just joined. We are mocking up Toy Mecha. So I've been talking about how I want to focus on the ball joints, because those are something you only get in toys. So if we can make the ball joints feel good, then it'll be clear it's a toy, not a sci-fi mecha. And right now I'm talking about the fact that I like to have a hull with an interior. I like to have two separate kinds of plastic. And in this case, what it would be is the hull would be where you might put your stickers and your paint job and stuff. And then you've got the decorative plastic elements inside pretending to be robot stuff. Like in here, you've got like, this is a pneumatic arm, like a pneumatic winch, and then here we've got like a sensor plate or something. And those things will allow us to create depth out of our toys. Now the idea here is that we can mock up some real cheap toys too. JojoJet says, just a 3D model or a physical toy? Just a 3D model. So the basic idea of what I've been thinking about for the past couple of days is that I want to make a mech programming game, but I want to make it really silly. So the idea here is that we're going to use toy mechs. And the idea is that you're basically hacking your toy mechs with, programming them to do stuff. And in the actual game, it's just going to be like this really dense, over-serious fiction. The sort of thing that a 9-year-old might think is a serious war story. Totally overblown scenery-chewing war story featuring these little toy mechs. And I thought that would be fun. I'm not going to say that that's definitely what I'm going to do. But I think it is going to be fun. The problem is that if you actually do a search for toy mechs, most of the toy mechs that you'll find are modern Transformer-style toy mechs, which are they look like this. Let me just print this down here. The modern Transformer mechs, they look like this. which really isn't a very good aesthetic for a game or a movie, and it makes it difficult to see what's going on. So we're not making that kind of toy mech, and that means that when I look at the references, I've got to really be careful. I think what we want to do with our toy mechs is that since we're focusing... Oh, I managed to... Don't tell me I broke my pen. There it is. That's weird. Did I? Huh. I broke the tip on this by doing that stupid shit. Oh well. Switch to my other pen. Later I'll switch out the nib. There we are. If you hammer your nib against your plate for that long, it will break. It didn't actually. The thing that nib is like 4 years old. It's not a great loss. It's just it happened at the wrong moment. So since we're talking about these plastic plates on the outside, my thinking is that those plastic plates are going to help us define the visual of each toy mech. Just as an example, if you're going to look at certain famous toy mechs, or at least certain famous mecha in fiction, they're often going to have something like a canopy like this, and then they'll have like this arm that comes off to the side and that sort of jazz. So from our perspective, this sort of visual is backed up by the fact that this probably make the legs like this, yeah. But our visual is backed up by the fact that this is, it's technically a Carnage Heart style game. So I'll go ahead and pitch you the full thing since you seem to be interested. So the idea is that there is going to be a programming grid, right? And your input comes in from one area. And so wherever this glowing spark hits, that is the chip that gets executed. And so what you do is you put in chips that say, do this and then go this way, and then, search for an enemy. And then if you find one, go this way. If you don't find one, go this way, and so on and so forth. And you set it up like that. I wanted to do this because there's a lot of power behind this dynamic that didn't get explored properly in Carnage Heart, which is the one that did this back in 1998, 2001, something like that. There's a lot of fun stuff you can do with this kind of topological constraint. If you look at most mech programming games, they're like, so this happens, and then you can go anywhere you want and do whatever you want, and then this happens, and hey, go do whatever. But by having a very, very strict topological set of constraints, you can really restrict the kinds of things that you can do and make it so that overcoming those restrictions is really fun. It's like a flowchart, but that's the thing. It's not a chart. It's a strict grid. That introduces a lot of constraints that charts don't have. Because of the physicality of this, for example, if you were to put a chip here and then put a chip here and then put a chip here and then put a chip here, if you do this, then you could send your pulse out this way, or you could send it off the board to reset, or you could send it to the left again to start the sequence over. Because of the topological constraints, this situation creates kind of a crammed environment. It works to create a sort of very specific flow that you must be aware of in order to build these codes, as opposed to just a normal flowchart style coding where you can build it in any sort of pattern you want with any sort of forking you want. But the thing I really like about this is that we're going to be doing some fun stuff with variables. So I might as well talk about that. So if we have a big grid like this, how you pass variables is one of the weaknesses of Carnage Heart, and it makes Carnage Heart's high-level play basically not exist. But let me give you an example. Here comes the flowchart, right? So we want to do a scan for enemies, right? We want to see if we can find ourselves some enemies. And so we're like, scan for an enemy within 100 meters. And if we don't find one, reset. And if we do find one, then go down this way. And down here we'll have a, shoot. So shoot takes an argument. You have to have shoot, you have to tell shoot what to shoot. You have to pass it a target. Well, scan creates that, right? So here's the trick. When you create a variable, so here's your target variable. When you create a variable, it gets automatically passed to all of the neighboring tiles that can understand it. So in this case, if you find an enemy, that enemy will automatically get passed down to this shoot tile, this shoot circuit, as long as it's here. But it'll also get passed this way if you have something else. So, for example, we might say, track or maybe ping or something like that, and we might come back around to that at some point, and it'll still have this unit stuck in there. And on the other hand, if we were to come down here, we could do like, if you don't find a target, then instead of going off grid, go this way. And then we will just go down this way with a no-op, and then we will scan again. This time 200 meters. And once again, if we find a target, it'll automatically pass in every direction. So now this shoot command will get a command from whichever one of those happens to work. Because the variable passing and the chart, the flow, the actual read head, the program head, are both in physical space, but they're not one-to-one. You can do a lot of really fun advanced stuff by, say, throwing variables to places that you don't plan to go. And it should have a lot of legs. It should be a really interesting kind of programming setup. But in order to do it, I've got to make Unreal do 2D programming grids, and I don't know how to do 2D stuff in Unreal, which is why at the moment we are doing 3D stuff in Unreal. So I was just talking about how the main faces of the mech define the mech, but one of the problems that we've got is that some of these are your mechs and some of them are enemy mechs, and chances are we need the units to work for both. The reason that's a problem is because of the view angle. If you're looking at an oncoming enemy mech, then, for example, this might be a pretty good profile because you can really see that head and these arms, right? And it'll feel like this is, a hunched over mech coming at you. But from behind, that would probably look like this. And it would be really hard to really make out, and it would feel strange. The legs wouldn't have the presence they need. You wouldn't really get any planes on the back. So when we think about how we want these mechs to read, we have to understand that they're going to be visible from the back as often as the front. And that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. But it is something where I think that our previous discussion about showing the insides a little bit could be pretty helpful here. For example, if we see this mech from the back, it could look, something where we are seeing specific interior areas that are normally, reserved, normally not shown because they're facing the wrong way. And that'll tell us that this is the backside of the mech, that this is the vulnerable half of the mech. And I think that might be a fun sort of aesthetic to show, so that you have mech designs where the back of the mech is where you see all of the toy circuitry, and the front of the mech is where you see the details, the plate, the stickers and the hull. Now this is not a very good mech in terms of its balance because the legs are pretty weak. But you can already see how if we remember the ball joints exist, we might be able to make those ball joints do some work for us in terms of making it feel like a toy. But this one ended up feeling more like a guy in a rubber suit, which is not really what we want. Drawing mecha from the back is really unintuitive, and if you ever do a search for mecha, you will find that literally every robot in every picture is shown from the front. Which is, of course, because mecha are they're beauty shot devices. They have no purpose other than looking good. And so you're always going to try and shoot them from the front because that's the angle that we're most familiar with. Oh, you know what? If we build our mecha with the idea that they're going to look slightly goofy from the back, then we can actually build the back to be the core, and just make them really thick, it says. We can make the back be the core that the parts snap onto. So for example, if we've got this big plate for the head, what that actually is it's going to be a plate with some clips. and then there's going to be, I mean, in terms of being a toy, then there's going to be, you know, some sort of surface where those clips can attach to. And you put it on like this, see? And I think it might be fun if we sort of make the back of the mech the part where all of the clips get put and the part where all of the overflow seams show, all of that jazz. Because, I mean, if you look at the back of like a He-Man toy, you're going to see something like, you know, there's his head, and then here's his shoulders, and then here's this socketed arm right here. He's got this beefy socketed arm. And you're going to see that there is going to be a seam of plastic running down the arm and down the sides of our He-Man toy. And I think that that is probably a good visual for us to copy. In addition, this is where you're going to find things like the nozzle injection point for the mold, or you know, 1986 Korea, whatever, right? This, I think, could be a very valuable tool for us in terms of making these feel like toys. I don't think there is a common idea of what the back of a mech is supposed to look like, because they're always shown from the front, and from the back they're basically always just like flat planes like this, for example, with the arms that get attached. So it's not something that has classically been paid much attention to. And I know that was a problem with some of the mech designs from, you know, Battletech, for example. They made this big game with all these Battletech mechs, and the backs of the mechs look terrible because they're not part of Battletech lore. Battletech always shows the mechs from the front, like everybody does. Oh, I got a Zaku here. Zaku always had a really fun visual. One of the things I like about toys is when there is some kind of floating armor. So, for example, if we were to look at an arm, so here is the head of our mech, and if we were going to have the arm attached to the torso here, what if they're kind of modular, like they have a port to slot into on the back? Well, they have to be at least somewhat modular, because I need to be able to equip different weapons and secondary weapons. But I don't want to make it complicated for me. I want them all to fit as their own asset. Sorry, I got distracted thinking about that idea. So anyway, if we have a ball joint here that attaches to the shoulder area, and then that ball joint goes down into the arm like this inside, then what we would have is we would have an arm that was like this, right? And then we could have this giant ball, this hollow half shell here, and that would cover up the ball joint. But you'd be able to very clearly see where the joint is inside of it, because it's just like a half shell like this. And it would add a lot of bulk to a robot that is otherwise clearly just toy joints. There's no, there's no musculature. There's no gears, no engines, no batteries, no reactor. And so to make it feel like there are batteries and engines and reactors and stuff, you need to bulk it up a little bit. And I like the idea of bulking it up a little bit being literally just having these cheap half shells over the arms. Jojo Jet says, what I'm thinking is that you could snap two of them together like a Lego. This would solve an issue of what to make the back look like. I'm not entirely sure that utility would have, not exactly sure what utility that would have though. So I think it's a good idea to make the backs have a unified visual. I don't think that they need to be functional in any way. I think that them merely having a visual that works for us is enough. So, for example, if we decide that they all have the injection mold injection point on the back and a Made in Korea sticker or whatever, not a sticker, but like an imprint, then this would be something that would show up on all of the mecha, and we would always know what was going on. It doesn't have any function, but it works well for what we need. So when I'm thinking about the hips of these robots, in this sort of toy, the hips are normally canted forward like this. And the reason for that is because the joints are usually surprisingly far back, like this. So you'll have then you'll have the thigh armor area, which would be probably something like this. The half shell. I don't know. It might be a full box. It doesn't matter. It probably varies from mech to mech. And then you've got your knee joint. And then you've got your shin. And then we've got another ball joint for the foot. And the idea is that the football joint is always going to look really strange in terms of what we expect to see from a mech. Because what I think I want is for every single foot joint to have this long pin-based ball joint. And I think the reason that would be good is because it's very clearly not a real mech. It's very clear that this is not how real mechs are built. So this is obviously going to be a toy. And that's going to be a big factor in making it feel like properly toy-esque. It also means we won't be able to use the default human skeleton, which is fine. I'm fine with that. And then, there's like this centralized unit here, a centralized grundular region. We're Mecha. Hurrah! Something like that. So you can see the idea here is to have a combination of thick metal castings and thin metal, thick plastic castings and thin plastic shapes, like ping pong balls cut in half, stuff like that. But to make it distinct is going to be a little bit of a challenge when we are seeing these things from the rear. Trying to imagine what kinds of basic visuals we'd be seeing, and I guess it depends. It depends on whether we're coming down from the top or coming up from below. Coming up from below, a low angle shot has a lot of merit when it comes to toy mechs because it makes the toys feel hilariously huge. Whereas coming down from above is the more classic mech style game, right? But the thing is that we don't need the classic mech style game camera because this has no classic mech style controls. We never need to tell the mech where to go. We never need to know what the mech is looking at because the mech is automated. It's programmed. So we just have to know how it's doing. So these low angle shots with these really, really tall toy mechs might be kind of fun. We don't want to overdo it to the point where they are annoying and make it hard to tell what's going on. But it would be kind of fun to have them. The thing about these is that they kind of show the area of the mech that the toy manufacturers would usually skimp out on. Normally that's not going to be an area that gets a lot of toy attention. It's a joint. And maybe the other problem is that the back region is where we can do the most customization. So for example, if we wanted to, we could have a mech that is, got the shoulders like this and is like a super broad shouldered mech. And then it comes down into the hips down here, and he's got these massive lumbering arms, right? You couldn't really do this if the shot was from below because it wouldn't really show up right. It wouldn't really feel right to see that same setup from below because that's just not visually how it works. So by changing up the exact shape of the shoulders of the mech, we can get a lot of performance out of exactly how the mech looks and feels that would be difficult to do if we were from down low, from below. So if we did something like this, it would come off a little bit more insectoid from behind, if you can see what I'm sort of saying. And then we would have like the injection mold point and a sticker down here. Yeah, I think we're definitely going to have to go from on high. It's fun to think about different camera angles, but just from the perspective of having different shapes, different pseudo-humanoid shapes, we are going to need to be able to see them from a fairly high angle. So we'll just go with the classic visual. A lot of the toy mechs are hugely bottom heavy. They have like really, really beefy legs. And a lot of them are the opposite, and they have really, really spindly legs. And I know exactly what's going on there. The ones with the beefy legs can actually stand, and the ones with the spindly legs are a real pain in the butt. From our perspective, that's not terribly important, but obviously we're going to probably go with more spindly leggish sort of mechs, just because we're using these ball joints, and with the really heavy legs, it wouldn't be real clear where the ball joint was. So for example, if we have a mech that's shaped like this, with its arms out here, I'm a mech, and it's got a head up here, and then it's got these enormous, armor style legs with these massive, massive feet. Kind of reminds me of a rapper, a specific rapper. Can't touch this. But there's no space for the foot ball joint to actually show up here. So that's why it's not really a great visual for us. Really what makes more sense for us is more like the Stellar style. That's, I think, a brand name. The My Build mecha are the same way, where they have some pretty wide legs, and the idea is that ball joint allows you to create the stances that you want to create. And the legs aren't spindly exactly, but they're not the center of mass. The center of mass is up here somewhere, in that this is often how the mecha look. They're like this giant ball with some detailing like this. And then they've got the arms coming off, and the arms are often the same as the legs in terms of how they look. They're kind of spindly and robot-y, covered in greebles, which is not a bad way to do things. They're not a bad look. Obviously, we're not going to be copying their look. There's no reason to. But this one has arm testicles, which is an interesting choice. Not the one I drew, the one I'm referencing. My guess is that these Stellar mechs can be assembled in a lot of different ways, and some of those ways are very silly. Now, the other kind of toy mech that you run into is, of course, the absolute low-budget toy mech, which is, basically like a bucket. This is like a infant's toy mech. And then they've got these basic bolt arms with their hands like this. And then they've just got like a thing on top of the bucket. And then they've got some leg stuff going on. And there's nothing wrong with this kind of mech either. I wouldn't mind using this same sort of visual for some of our mechs. But the thing about them is, once again, They have these big, heavy legs so that they can physically stand up when a toddler plays with them. And those big, heavy legs aren't going to serve us very well when it comes to the joints we want to use. But I'm beginning to think that maybe we should just do both. Now, the problem is that when we actually animate these things, if they don't have a clear ankle joint, it's going to be incredibly obnoxious to get their feet to land on the ground. Maybe we don't care, though. Maybe we're willing to just ignore that. They're toys, after all. So if we don't mind the fact that, from an animation perspective, these giant knee-high boots that can't move, they can't shift left or right, they can't pivot, those are no good for actually having feet that connect to the ground. But maybe we don't give a shit. If we use the giant boot method, these are popular toys, but they can't be walked. They're pose toys. They're action figures. I found one that's shot from the back. Shocking. But basically, this one that's shot from the back looks like this, right? Where it's got these really cool pauldrons, which definitely we're going to have pauldrons. I was talking about that earlier. Depends on exactly how I want to do it. I don't want to come off looking like too much like what could pass for an actual intended to be military mech in a video game sort of thing, right? And they've got a head. I don't like this pen very much, which is why I wasn't using it. It's the newer pen, and so far, every time I get something new from Wacom, it is worse than the old one. And that's definitely true of this pen, which only draws in a specific 15-degree range. And then it's got these legs, and these legs are like... they're like this, and then they've got these huge boots, right? Because that's the point of this kind of toy mech, that it needs to be able to stand up. And then it's got feet. Now this one's better than most because the feet are obviously on a pivot joint, but they're not on a left-right pivot joint. They're on a forward-back pivot joint this way, which is more useful when posing the mech and pretty much useless when trying to animate it running. If we get too big on the feet, it's going to be very difficult to animate the mechs running, as anybody who's ever tried to animate something with big feet knows. You ever see any sort of Sonic the Hedgehog cutscenes with the giant Lego boots on Knuckles, and they have to animate him running like this, because his feet can't come within 30 feet of each other because they're so big, and so therefore he has to always swing his feet way out to the side every single time he takes a step. And I'd like to avoid that because it feels much worse in a mech. I mean, a weird furry creature, fine, but a mech is supposed to be reasonably efficient. It doesn't really make much sense for their animations to flail around, these toys, is this the same group? Who made this one? This one is Joy Toy. Okay, so it looks like there's a class of mecha called Steelbone Mecha, or something similar. And they look really crappy, but they have the right joints. They look, like I said before, they all look like crappy Transformers mecha, like the new Transformers that are just a giant mass of splotch color. But there are quite a few people that build these, like Fengling Tech and MyBuild. Joy Toy is the one that has the good skeleton and the absolutely terrible visuals. It's like, did you want a mecha that's made out of tiny alternating blocks of white and black? Boy, have I got the mecha for you. Fengling Tech is interesting, though, because I think that they're doing derivative mecha. What is this mecha from? I think that it's a knockoff of a classic mecha. I can't remember what anime it's from, but it's got this really cool like steampunk style visual. It wouldn't work for our game, but it's neat to look at, and you can definitely see what I'm talking about. I'll just I right-clicked on it to say show image, and instead it showed me the image of the weird blue grid that Amazon puts over whatever image you're looking at in order to make sure that you can't see it. There we are. It's this guy. Oh no, I closed my search tab. Disaster. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of visuals in terms of how we want things to look. For me, the biggest question is the profile, the way it strikes your visual, the way it strikes your eye when from the front or from the back. And in this case, from the back is more important because we are more important, and we are going to see the mechs from the back most often. Our own mechs are going to be from the back. So we need to understand how to build mechs that look good from the back if we are going to be doing this sort of mech-based system. So the width of the back and the kinds of decorations on the back are going to be a major factor. We also have to think about this area here, which I'm thinking about standardizing this part, just like the lower half of the torso. Because if I have a standardized part, things are going to go a lot easier. Excuse me, things are going to go a lot easier for me. And if there's one part that needs to be standardized, it is the hip joint, because that's going to be one of the most complicated joints on a mech specifically. Shoulder joints are more forgiving because you can have the shoulder like float off of the torso of the mech pretty easily, but hips don't float like that, and it would feel kind of strange if all of the hips did. Well, maybe they could. Maybe I could just go ahead and fake it and just be like, whatever. But it probably makes more sense to have it standardized. I could still do it floaty if I need to. I don't know. Just kind of playing around at the moment. But you can see how the most important part here is going to be this section, is what the player is going to see immediately. Specifically, they're going to probably see the entirety of the shoulder sweep, this whole sweep here. And so we definitely want to make sure that that sweep works. We may be able to add additional decorations or something down here. For example, you could have like a mud flap. But because this sweep is going to be the thing that the player sees, this sweep should be the thing that is unique between the different mecha classes. Like if I've got 3 different mech types, they all need to have different shoulder sweeps. So that means that they have to have different breadths of shoulder, and they also have to have different pauldron elements. And with that in mind, we can design a whole bunch of mechs really quite easily. So for example, we could switch out the pointy plates with balls. And I already said that these balls could be like half-cut ping pong balls. And if the shoulders come in like this, and we've got like a forward-mounted head like down here, you can see how this visual will end up giving off a very different feel for someone seeing this mech from behind. And we're just kind of basic blocking stuff out here at this point. It's not what you would call an actual physical finished mech. But a big part of this is also going to be where the armor plate shows. These armor plates are going to be places where we can put stickers and colors. So if we wanted to change this mech up to feel more like a T shape instead of an A shape, we could just do it like this, right? And by changing out where the armor plates are, we change out the feel of the overall shape. So now we've got this sort of shape. It doesn't really make sense to have those be that way, though. They should really be ball-shaped to kind of keep that going. So now we've got these kind of dog bone style shapes on the back. And we could even like double down on that and do something like this. And so this would be, whatever the default plastic is, maybe it's off-white or black or something, and then that would be the part that is in the shadows. And then we have the rest of this mech with a proper feel, right? So it would be lit like this. Yeah, the basic idea is not bad in terms of having these shapes to play around with. I don't want to forget about the fact that these shapes are in 3 dimensions. So this guy here, for example, his shoulders are sloped forward. So if we were viewing him from below, and this is his butt, then his back would slope forward and hunch forward over his hips, and his shoulders would be forward over here, right? He would be this shaped from below. And that matters. A player is going to see immediately if someone is sloped like that, because we have actual lighting in this game. We have it so that it's going to be using plastic style shapes, but the lighting is going to be there. So obviously a different sort of canting, a different sort of, is it tilted back? Is it straight across? Each one of them will feel different. And of course we inherit that from human beings. When you've got someone who's upright and bony, it feels very different from when you've got someone who is hunched forward and hulking. It's just a different sort of visual. And we can really play that up, right? And it will allow us to make different feelings to each of our mech classes. The only problem is that mechs that lean back are pretty rare because of the way their feet work, their legs. So mechs almost always lead with their chest or their head rather than with their hips. So all of the mechs are basically leaned forward to some extent. And with that in mind, what you could think of instead is if we've got these rolled shoulder forward mechs like this, you can put their shoulders in down here, which would make them feel like they've been rolled forward. But we could also take the same shape and cut it here and add the shoulders here. And this would put the shoulders further back on the mech, and it would change how forward the shoulders felt. It would make it so that this mech has a more rear set of arms. It's a mech that's not as far forward. I'm not sure that it'd work very well. I don't think it would. We'd have to try it. And by the way, though, the reason I stream this kind of shit is just because it's actually easier to think about this stuff if you're talking. So even though, I'm not interacting with chat any because I don't have any chat, this is something that is effective. It's something that really helps to define the sort of shapes and visuals I'm talking about. Now, one thing that is fun, but I don't know whether it would be feasible, there are a lot of toy mechs that are like one big shape. For example, you might get like a shape like this. And then they'll have some kind of hip setup for their legs like this. And they'll have some kind of arms. And then maybe some kind of gun. But it's just this one decorated shape rather than being human. Like it's not supposed to feel human. It's supposed to feel like one decorated shape. And oftentimes they'll actually transform into something that's that shape. Now the thing I like about this is that it comes off as a toy. It is extremely toy-esque. And that is very powerful. This one has like blue stripes, blue pipes rather. That is a very powerful visual for what I'm trying to do. But the problem with it is that every single one of these toys would need to have their own completely separate rig and animation setup. if I use humanoid frames, I can use the same animations for all the mechs. I just have to blend between 2 or 3 different classes of animation, and I can just change the bone length. Whereas if every single one of the mechs is fundamentally like a different shape, then it becomes very, very hard to do that. And this is especially true of like really childish mechs, like the Playmates toys, which are, shaped like squares, and then the legs come out like this. And it's like there's no way I could animate that with the same animations that I'd use for another mech. It's too weird, and all of the shapes are distinct. I mean, I suppose I could try. It'd be interesting to see whether it would work. Yeah, I'm getting pretty far down in the image references from Google here, and these have stopped being mechs and are like dogs and aliens and shit. So when it comes to really cheap ass toys, these are the kinds of cheap ass mech toys that I was originally thinking about when I was thinking about this. This is a knockoff pseudo Lego toy. And you can see that it's got these really cheap molded plastic blocks. And in this case, the idea is that there's a seat made out of Lego top, and you can put your characters inside that seat and run around Steam Mecha style. Wow, this is like pseudo-Japanese. I wonder whether Jay's Electromech is from Japan, or he's just fetishizing it. Either way, this clunky visual is very appealing. It's part of what I wanted, especially the way these legs have their hollowed out injection molded interiors. Those interiors are the sort of thing that really makes something feel like a toy, right? So if we had a leg on our mech that was clearly injection molded, hook up to the hip joint there, for example, and the idea is that it is basically just an I-beam, right? And then it's got like this. Now in this case, the toy frame actually doesn't even bend at the knees. It is 100% stuck. But you know what I'm thinking? Maybe I've been trying too hard. These are toys, but they're toys doing over serious things in fairly realistic settings, right? That's the point. It's like, oh, we got to battle our way through the forest. So it would make sense if they could just be animated in ways that don't fit the original toy at all. Like they can bend their legs, even though there's no reason why the plastic should be able to bend. So if we just ignore the fact that these cheap-ass moldings can't actually do any of the things we want them to do, and make them do it anyway, that would probably be fine. Right? So if that's the case, then we're talking about making mechs out of a few basic casted elements, rather than more complicated mechs with a whole bunch of features. We're talking about cheap knockoffs. Oh god, this mech is called Ninjago. I guess it's technically a Lego mech. That must be from the 80s, man. That's not something that should be released these days. It's both too cheap looking and too culturally inappropriate. Well, Yeah, so one of the biggest issues I've got with doing references for mecha is simply the fact that the mecha references are all beauty shots. They're all shot from the front to look as good as possible, and our mecha are all going to be shot from the back. At least all the players' mechas. And that completely changes the game in terms of what looks good. I'm replacing the nib now because I don't like the new pen. Wait, did that actually just fix the nib? Yeah, okay, never mind, I won't replace the nib. I don't know why I'm so hesitant to replace the nib. I've got literally 30 nibs ready to go at any moment. This one from 4 years ago still works, though. Maybe the problem with the new pen is that it's got a bad nib. Don't know. Yeah, we're back. So let's go ahead and model some stuff. I'll put away the art assets and open up some Blender. Boom. Magic. All right. Let's model us some cheap-ass mechs. Because the cheap-ass mechs are probably the easiest place to start. So I guess even though I just deleted it, we're going to add it right back in. The cube. And obviously the best thing to do with the cube is to cut it in half. And use a mirror modifier. So if we wanted to make this cube feel like a toy chest, there are a few things we want to do. Here we've got an inset that is not respecting the rules. No. There it is. So the way that these work is typically, well, that's not right. Let's do this cut here. Typically, this is the basic shape. Now, the idea here, though, is, of course, that this is not the shape in use all the time. This is not the way that this shape looks. Normally, we have this pitched angle, like so. And obviously, the shape would be curved and made more interesting. But for now, I just want the basic setup. So we're just going to go with the most basic representation of what we're trying to do. There. Toy mecha. I think that we need more space down here. And then we could pull in another cube. Boom. And this is going to be our leg. Before we get any further, let's make a material for these cubes. We'll go ahead and make this material first. We'll call this plastic. And we'll make the material a crappy blue. I think we're going to have to replace this guy with a sun. Ciao. Let's tilt the sun so we can see what we're doing. There we go. And we'll refine this later. It's not that big a deal. But this plastic is not yet quite right. Oh. I've been slouching down further and further because I've been following the mic. I need a new mic stand. So we don't want it to be plastic, but we do want it to be very, very shiny. So we're going to up the specular, down the roughness even further. And we're going to want to make sure that it's got a little bit of a clear coat. There, that'll do. So down here, we'll just pick the same one, plastic, and we'll make a leg. So I think currently we're modeling on this half, so we'll put it over here. In order to make it feel right, we're going to have to give it a sloped top. But one of the details is that this face doesn't actually exist at all. And we're going to use a thicken. More. There we are. So the basic idea here is that rather than this setup that we've got right now, what we're going to need to do is add in a circle. Oh, that's got way too many joints. It's fine though. Now, I mean, there are better ways to model this. There's no particular reason why I have to do it like I'm doing it. I thought I deleted a face. It did not delete. So presumably I didn't click on it correctly. So we're going to go ahead and try to do this a little bit better. Just delete these. And we'll put these circular balls in where they're supposed to go first. And I think that a shape would be better if it's a little bigger. Make sure the thickness is like 0.08. And we'll duplicate it, bring it down, bring it forward, duplicate it, bring it down and back. And then all we need to do is connect the dots. The best thing about this is it doesn't have to be perfect because the mech is a crappy toy mech, so it doesn't have to be perfect. It's kind of the point. And then what we can do is fill in this side just with blanket fills. That didn't work. Okay. So really, this is the fill we want, but we have these overlaps here that I don't like. Well, it's okay. We'll deal with them later. And is this material not properly set up for... yeah. Great. So I don't actually know which of these faces are back faces. That's weird. It looks like that face is not on the correct part of the circle, so we'll get rid of it. And there is our crappy leg. It's got some chatter, some damage. We don't really care at this stage. We'll have to come back later and make it crappy in a slightly different way. But for now, the next step is to simply extrude the foot. Well, that didn't work. This leg turned out to be a disaster. We're going to have to completely redo it at some point. It's 0% decent. It's pretty crap. That's what I get for not doing anything in Blender for too long and then going back into Blender and then just completely failing. Great stuff. All right, so the idea here is that this leg would go into position like this. And we could, in fact, just use a mirror modifier for now, so that's what we'll do. So if we take a look at the shitty mech that we're copying, the leg isn't this personality free. This is a very meek leg with no personality to it at all, but in actuality that particular mech has a ton of personality driven elements to it. We're definitely going to have to redo this. It's just nowhere near good enough. Yeah, it's just shitty. It's just shitty. To be honest, we should probably just build it out of pure blocks and then hollow it out instead of trying to build the interior first. However, I think it was the right idea to start off with circles. Instead of cubes. So we've got a couple of options as to what we want to do when we have multiple materials, but in this case we're just going to make another material rather than trying to do like vertex painting or something. We can fix it later. So what we're going to do is we're going to define some fake clamps. And to do that, we're just going to select some of these faces here and here. They're at different heights. More or less. It doesn't have to be perfect. It should be, however. Yeah, I guess that's fine. And then we can just extrude them out. And then the last thing we can do is grab these faces, or edges, just slide them back. And now we have something that looks a little bit like it's more fun than what we had before. The thing we had before was really pretty rough. And then we can create... Oh, I didn't want to do it like that. There we are. Just add it in here. We can create the front plane of the leg, which is going to be something that means we have to adjust what we created here because it's Anyway, the front plane of the leg on this particular cheap plastic toy is basically this kind of simple plane, but what it has for shaping is it has an attached bulge, something that allows it to have some visual. So to do that, we're just going to create a bulge. And now the idea here is, of course, that this is not quite so simple as simply a bracket square bulge. It's got a little bit of shape to it. It's a little bit soft. And to do that, all we really have to do is bevel. And then we can take this top element extrude it up a little bit, and then do some extrusion clicking. There we are. I'm sure there is a better way to do this, something that follows a path automatically or whatever, but this will do for now. And then we just bring it in. Now, I'm not going to claim that that is some kind of wizardry, but it certainly looks better than it did last time with our incredibly terrible leg. Now this is more of a moderately terrible leg, which is much more livable. And then for the knee, we've just got another cylinder. Just add that back in. And now for these kinds of legs, the cylinder always bows to the outside because that's just the safest thing to do in terms of the leg, because otherwise you might have them slap into each other. So that's why they almost always have a larger exterior, a larger outside than inside. And in this case, excuse me, what they're doing is the same basic idea, just have like something like this, and then they've got some areas where it comes out from here. So we'll just select some like that. And it's trivial for us to select these and bevel them. That's the very, very basic Ninjago style leg. It's not a perfect copy. There's no reason to make it a perfect copy. But it is more or less how that leg works. And I chose it because it looks crappy, but I want it to look crappy in terms of it being a bad toy rather than it being me who can't model. You know the difference, right? Anyway, for the back of the leg, what we're going to want to do is we're not going to do anything for it. We're going to leave it like that for now. We'll come around to it later. We got another cube coming in for the shin. Just sorry, I've been doing too much streaming and my brain just shut off. Did you hear it? Like click, and it's done. So these legs are at a 30-degree angle, like this. And they have a very, very simple shin structure. It is literally just a flat plane. There's no decorations on the shin at all. And the foot is similarly a 30-degree angle on the top, but of course it's flat on the bottom. So we're going to add in a cube. And we're going to cut here, and then we're just going to pull this up. We'll adjust the back of it some other time. Now this particular toy has a fairly complicated foot. It's got two kinds of plastics embedded in it, and that's because they need to make it so that you can mount it on a surface. So this foot isn't actually the foot. The foot is a circular plane. And the reason for that is because this circular plane is a Lego connector. It's got all the Lego nubs on it, so that when you put it on a Lego surface, it will properly attach to the Lego surface. That's why this exists in the toy that I'm referencing. And then the other plastic comes over and kind of just grips it. And the way that works is, of course, that is simply that there's Lego on the inside of that foot too, but it's set up differently. So it's more or less like this. The foot has some bits. Wow, that's terrible. More or less. More or less, that's the kind of foot it has on the toy. It's not right. There's a lot of stuff that's not right with that foot. We'll talk about that later. We'll fix it later if we want to. I'm just making a toy to see whether or not it can be done. So for now, we're going to duplicate this, pull it back, and that's going to be the back of our leg. And then in order to do the exterior beat, we'll just grab these two pieces, move them on the x-axis, and then merge these faces. There we go. We can simply repeat the process down here, except in this case we're just going to straight extrude like that. And then we can just go back in and create the interior drop. Now in terms of merging this into the foot, we've got a lot of options. I think we're just going to flat drop it like this, and just rearrange the foot. Hello, thank you. And there's no cut there, so we'll just extrude straight down. Boom. And that is more or less the toy in question. There is some decoration going on here. This is a little bit more complex than I've made it out to be, which is not a big deal. So we'll just go ahead and do some of that for no particular reason. So the way to do that is to select all of these and then deselect checkered with a 2-2. No, why did that not work? 2, 2. Thank you. And you can see that what we have here is a problem. It did not actually count it out properly and left us with off-center crap. So we're going to try one more time. Off-center crap again. Not a big fan of off-center crap. I don't really know why Blender can't figure this out. It's not the most complicated thing in the world. There, look, Blender. It's even and symmetrical. I know. Shock. Anyway, we put that down and then we change that part back to plastic. And that's pretty much how it looks on the Ninjago. And if we want to see both legs, it's as easy as adding a mirror modifier. Now, in this case, this torso is actually much, much wider in the reference image because it has to contain a Lego figurine. So it's like mostly cockpit, which gives it a really unusual, super, super wide shoulder. We're not going to be doing that. I just wanted to see whether or not I could get it to look like plastic. So this doesn't really look like plastic. I mean, it looks a little bit like plastic, but it doesn't actually matter very much because what matters is whether it looks like plastic in Unreal. So to check that out, we're going to name this. We'll name this Leg Test. Then we'll come over here. And it says Unreal Engine 4. It's actually Unreal Engine 5. That's fine. We'll just export it. Pop over into Unreal. Here it comes. Oh, I forgot to... Hold on. I forgot to unwrap it, so it was complaining. It happens. So we look in geometry, exported FBX, static mesh, here's some legs. Boom. They're huge. And you can see that the imported material is not very plasticky. That's not a big surprise. I don't believe that it imports any of the detailed elements. I think it just imports the color. So if we were to look at the materials here, we've got this one called plastic, and it's literally just the color, and you can see that. So if we wanted this to feel more like plastic, we would want to change out some other values here. So let's do that. We're going to drop the metallic down to 0, and then we're going to drop the roughness down to 0, but these are things that we're going to want to modify later, so we'll leave them like that. Now, even though the metallic is at 0, we're still getting perfect reflections off of it because the roughness is so low. So the roughness needs to be a little bit higher than 0, maybe 0.3. That's maybe a little too high. That's a little bit better. All of the rest of these are pretty basic. I don't think we need to modify them at the moment. Only question I have is specular. So, well, let's go ahead and fuss with the specular. The specular is only important on non-metallic surfaces, but guess what? This is a non-metallic surface. So you can see the difference. When we rack the specular down to 0, we get no reflections. More than that, we actually get no highlights. Whereas if it's at 1, we get a really shiny reflection and some really shiny highlights. Since there is no... Well, actually, there might be. There might be a variant on this material that is that has some additional functionality to it, because there are things like clear coat that don't exist on this function as like an argument. I think we would have to actually build it ourselves. It's fine. It's fine. Let's take a look at how it feels once we've updated it like this. Yeah, so you can see how much more this feels like it's made out of plastic now. There are still some issues with it in terms of the plastic feel, but for something I put together in literally 30 seconds, that's not too shabby. If we go over and take a look at it in person, yeah, you really get the sense that this is made out of cheap plastic, and that's exactly what we want. So we can definitely do cheap plastic. The question is whether or not I can remember and polish up my modeling skills enough to pass as a cheap toy, but I haven't done any modeling in quite a while, so it's gonna have to pick it up again. Gonna have to learn it again. I think that this has legs, but we need to remember that a big part of this is going to be getting Unreal to do two-dimensional grid stuff. I need to be able to program a grid. I don't know how to make Unreal do any two-dimensional grid stuff, and that's not something I want to learn on screen because talking about it doesn't really help. I mean, if I'm really terrible at it, I'm sure someone watching could walk me through it, but hopefully I won't be that bad at it. I've done it in dozens of game engines before. Yeah, I think I'm going to stop for the day. See you around. Where's the stop button? No, that's recording. That's stop.